In my first Pokemon Monster Hunter Fusions episode, I really felt like I stepped up my game art-wise. And from a lot of the nice comments I got from all of you, seems like a bunch of you felt the same. So today I want to try and step that up again, do a sequel to that episode and see if I can make something that I like even more than that Gyarados Leviathan drawing. And of course, I'll be using some of the suggestions that you all left for other Pokemon and Monster Hunter creatures I could use. So let's get into it, shall we? Let's go!
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
If one chose to spend their life in one of the various cities or kingdoms of this world, they'd possibly go from birth till death without seeing a single live Pokevern. And where, I ask, is the fun in that? The Pokevern hunters thrive in the dangers and excitement of the frontier, the lands ungoverned by man and teeming with beasts that will snuff out your lights in an instant, if your head is not on a swivel. These lands have taken the lives of many of those I grew up alongside, but at least they all lived exciting lives instead of pushing around dung carts or whatever it is people do in the so-called safety of the bland lands, as I call large cities. When I first left the Lavakoto hunting village, I acquired my own fair share of scars before finally finding and defeating my Pokevern partner, who still stands by my side to this day. The creature I managed to best was the Astalos, known by some as the storm spirit of the desert. It is a creature with the power to charge its body with electricity, and it is believed that it can summon a thunderous storm to even the driest stretches of sand. But, while it can bring the rains, it is also known for its ability to create sandstorms by flapping its powerful wings over the desert grounds. These Pokevern have incredibly sturdy exoskeletal plates across their bodies that keep them protected and aid them in conducting electricity. They even have a translucent crimson dome over each eye that protects them from external harm. Rendering this creature unconscious was not a simple task by any means. I was electrocuted so many times I had a twitch for months after the battle. But it was still a worthwhile venture all the same. I defeated the creature by luring it to the ground with a Pokevern flute, then used a hammer nearly the size of my own body to strike it in the head and neck over and over and over to a point where I was practically getting bored from the repetition, but I endured all the same. Of course, I had to be very wary not to slay the creature. While elements of its hide would have sold for a great deal, the gold acquired would be nothing compared to the glory of riding into my first Pokevern tournament astride the Astalos, as it is considered to be a creature that a novice hunter, which I certainly was at the time, should never be capable of besting. I, of course, proved them wrong. With enough blows of my hammer, the beast eventually passed out, and when it awoke, as a show of good faith, I had a meal slain and waiting for it to feast upon. It accepted the sustenance and our partnership began, and while the Astalos has challenged me on a few occasions since, this has only served to strengthen us both, and our time fighting other Pokevern and their tamers has been a legendary adventure. Now, I absolutely love how this one turned out, and I think it does compete with my Gyarados Leviathan drawing from the last episode, but I will say, it almost stresses me out a little bit looking at this one. Like, he's so intense, and just the lightning and the pose and the shrieking. It's like, I kind of just want to tell this guy to calm down. And he looks like he wishes elevators played heavy metal music instead of elevator music. Looking at his face, I can just hear one of those screaming goat videos on YouTube for some reason. But anyway, even with the over-the-top calm down buddy sort of nature of this one, I really love it. I ended up using a texture image for the wings to add this hexagon sort of texture to it that I kind of reshaped around to put it in perspective with some of the wings. I also put it on the tail and part of the thing on its head, and I used that to help inform some of the lighting, and I think that helped give it a sort of bug-like wing look, which I think is really cool. And then my favorite little detail about this one that's subtle, and you might not even notice it if you weren't seeing this drawing get drawn, is the fact that the wings are a little bit see-through, so you can see the lightning that goes in behind one of the wings. Just like I faded it out, but it's still there, and you can see that the streak continues in behind, and I think that's such a nice little simple detail that just, I think, looks really cool, especially when you take the time to notice that. Also, both Flygon and Astalos were two creatures that I heavily considered using in the first episode, but I never had the idea to fuse them together until a subscriber in the comment section of that video, Jacob Coleman, suggested that I mix them together, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I love that, it's perfect. So thank you for that suggestion, Jacob. So yeah, love this drawing, hope you all do as well. Let's take a look at the finished result. One of the first Pokevern I came across after acquiring my new ally was one that we very well could have flown right on by, but neither I nor my Flystalos were interested in passing up the opportunity for a difficult battle. The Devil Rampard is a beast with a hide and skull so thick it's said to be impossible for a mortal man to render it unconscious. Of course, I would have taken that as a challenge on my own, but seeing as how I now had a Pokevern partner, I deemed it best to fight in tandem with my new ally. We descended from the skies and I leapt from my ally's back, swinging my hammer right for the brute's head. And very quickly got first-hand evidence of how hard their skulls truly are, as it quite literally broke my hammer in two. Luckily, as I switched to my lance that I carried as well, my Flystalos was eager to strike out itself. It charged up a surge of lightning and bit down into the top of the beast's neck, unleashing an eruption of electricity. But it had little effect. My Flystalos clearly had never come across one of these creatures before and was unaware that the Devil Rampard is a very grounded creature, unable to be dealt significant harm by lightning. The brute promptly swung its head back and smashed its skull into my Flystalos, sending it hobbling off back into the air above. The Devil Rampart then smashed its skull into the side of a nearby stone face, busting loose a few dozen boulders. It swung its meaty tail and struck one mid-air, sending the rock hurtling towards my Pokevern. Luckily, Flystalos' speed made it easily able to dodge the blow, and by that time I was readied with my lance, so I charged in again and thrust it into the throat of the beast. Before it could sink its cascade of jagged teeth into my flesh, I drew back my lance, and Flystalos struck again, this time biting and clawing into the beast's back, without its lightning. We then altered blows with myself attacking from the ground and my ally from the skies. Eventually, the beast attempted to flee, charging with unexpected speeds for a creature of such girth and scale. But we were vigilant in our hunt. I leapt back onto my Flystalos and followed after, striking more and more until the beast was finally exhausted and we were able to finish it off. The gold we acquired for its hide lasted us for the following 2 years, but more important still, word quickly spread through the likes of the nearby Celadorma city that we were a pair not to be ignored. Now I think this fusion might be the most seamless one of all the ones I've done, like the two just seem to fit together so nicely, and a bunch of people did suggest that I do Deviljho and Tyranitar, and I do think technically speaking that would have actually been a better fit and would actually look super cool, but I've already done a fantasy beast version of Tyranitar, turning it into a dragon in my first Pokemon Dragons episode, and I know that wouldn't have looked the same as Tyranitar mixed with Deviljho, but since I'd already done a really rendered, really cool Tyranitar monster, I was like, let's go with a Pokemon that I haven't done a monstrous version of. I have used Rampardos before, but I turned it into a member of the Suicide Squad back in my Dinosaurs the variety episode, I think it was, which makes it a random addition to that video. But anyway, I forget why I did that. I will say one thing, or I guess two things that I think kind of weaken this one a little bit, is the pose and the environment. It does technically make sense for a Rampardos creature to be in a very mountainous, rocky kind of terrain, but I think for this one it might have made the creature stand out a little bit more if I'd done more plant life around it or something instead. The rocks just feel a little bit too similar to the texturing on the actual creature. And then pose-wise, just the pose of one of its feet is a little bit too angled, and the other leg I feel like could be pushed a little bit farther back instead of off to the side to make this feel a little bit more like a solid in-motion running kind of pose. But those are nitpick kind of things. I really love the rendering on this one. The head is super cool. For the saliva, I did something a little bit different and used a more additive layer instead of a regular layer to make the saliva have a little bit more of a translucent kind of look. And I think just all that paired together makes this such a cool drawing. Although I still think I like the Flygon one a little bit more for this episode. But still, let's take a look.
As per usual, all the art from this episode is available as posters on the PopCross Studios Teespring store. The inks and high-resolution art also went up a day early on Patreon, and people who support me for $5 a month on Patreon also currently get access to weekly bonus podcast episodes. Patreon and posters linked in the description, but for now, back into more art.
Now, as I was merely 16 at the time, despite having such a powerful Pokevern partner, I was only permitted to participate in the most junior of Pokevern tournaments in the region I resided in. Which is why, for my first foray into these competitions, I did not remain in my home region. Instead, I rode my Astalos out to the Ember Country. This is a region made up of little more than mountains and volcanoes, and is known to be treacherous. Those that reside there are said to be the toughest of the tough, as only the most hardened hunters could remain alive in this harsh climate with the kinds of beastly Pokevern that reside there. Because of this, they also have no limitations on their Pokevern tournaments. Anyone of any age can enter, so long as they accept responsibility for any injuries they may incur. If they even survive the battles, that is. I'd even heard tell that one of the tamers who regularly partook in the tournaments had as his ally a Charathalos, though I would not see evidence of that in my first days in these lands. Upon arriving to the territory, I was soon faced with a tamer that was intrigued by my Pokevern partner. She challenged us to a battle, though I could not even see her own ally. Still, I'm never one to refuse a challenge. I agreed and soon felt the earth beneath me rumbling. My Astalos instinctively rose from the ground with me clung to its leg as a crimson leviathan sprung from the stones beneath. I quickly recognized it from the tales of this region, and was astounded that a tamer so young had an ally such as this. It was nearly as impressive as having a Astalos partner at our age. Nearly. Her beast was called the Skeledirge. It was one of few Leviathan-class Pokevern to not reside in water, but instead within the earth, thriving in the bowels of volcanoes, even able to swim through molten rock. The thing that surprised me most about this creature, however, was that the tales of its voice were true. The creature's roar could shift into a melodic tune that would summon a flaming bird to appear above its head. This seemingly sentient flame then flew towards myself and Astalos, and worked wonders in distracting my Pokevern, as the Skeledirge drilled into and up through a mountain, then leapt out the side and snatched my beast's tail, dragging us back down to the earth. I fell to the ground as my Astalos flung full force into the fight. I soon saw the tamer had drawn her dual blades, so I pulled forth my lance once more. It was my first true Pokevern tamer battle, and I'd never felt more alive. Even though for these Pokemon Monster Hunter episodes, I'm definitely focusing much more on the art than the lore, I did like writing this episode more than the last one. The last one I did kind of just, rush it out because the point of that episode was the art. But this one, I saw a few people comment how I took a lot more from Pokemon than Monster Hunter lore. So I went back, researched a little bit more Monster Hunter stuff, and tried to work that in to flesh out this world a little bit more. And I did like having the narrator of this episode actually be a bit of a character. I guess technically it could be the same narrator as the last episode, but the last one I wasn't really giving the narrator any kind of personality, and this one I did. But anyway, in terms of the art for this one, I do like this one, but for a drawing that took not significantly longer than the others. I think this one took like 6 hours, which is, still a lot longer than I usually spend on a drawing. I don't think the result really reflects how long I spent on it. I don't think it stands out as being quite special as some of the other ones in this series so far. Don't get me wrong, I still like it. It's still up there in terms of my drawings, but it's just, it's not grabbing me as much. I think there's a few things that I could have done different. For one thing, with a pose like this, where so much of its stomach is taking up the image, I probably should have done something a little bit more interesting with the stomach design-wise. In fact, I'm even thinking I might kinda dull down the brightness of its stomach a little bit so that we're more drawn to looking at its head in contrast with the sky behind it. I do really like the pose of this one. I spent a while trying to get that just right. I think I spent an hour just getting the pose alone, and I think that does really work, and it's definitely a more dynamic pose in terms of my monster and creature designs. I think the magma spewing off it is a little bit too scattered and just like draws our eyes to little random points on the piece in a not great way. And I think I've definitely done better with having a creature have flames spewing out the side of their mouth before. I'm thinking maybe it could have even been cool if I just went with magma spewing out the sides of its mouth. Or maybe even just added like a magma pool in the background somewhere. I'm also thinking maybe the Agnaktor and Skeledirge were too similar to fuse together. Like when I saw them both, I was like, oh my god, these two are perfect. I love both their designs. Let's mash them together. But then once I started doing that, I was like, these two have maybe too much in common already. It might even be fun in this series to start doing some fusions that are more out there and make less sense. But I don't know, I don't want to bash this piece, I still like it, I just think in comparison to the other ones in this episode and the previous episode, it doesn't quite stand out for me. But maybe for some of you, it'll be your favorite from this episode. So let's take a look at the finished result.
Don't know which episode I think was better yet, but I'm very happy with both. If you haven't seen the first episode, you might want to go back and check that out, or you might like my Pokemon as Dragons episodes. And I'd love more suggestions for other fusions or Pokemon or Monster Hunter creatures that I could use, because I'd say there's a decent chance this gets around 3. But beside that, that's all for today, except of course we're ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want to leave you with today is the idea that 2 years in the grand scheme of your life is not a massive amount of time. But you can get a massive amount done in 2 years. This is something that I heard just before starting PopCross Studios 5 years ago. And in those first 2 years, even though the first year was pretty slow, by the time I'd gotten to the end of the 2 years, I'd become a full-time YouTuber, hit 200,000 subscribers, and was earning $20,000 a year more than I had at my highest paying animation job. So don't underestimate how much you can change your life in 2 years if you really put the work into something you care about. I hope that's inspiring, I love you all, and I'll see you all at the Community Redraw on Friday. Goodbye.